right, as the people keep coming in, I just want to say hello, everyone. My name is Nara Arnold, and I am an Education USA advisor. Welcome to our fifth day, our fifth webinar from the Education USA LL.M webinar series. Just a quick introduction. Education USA is a U.S. Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers, and we are in more than 170 countries and territories. The network promotes U.S. higher education to students around the world by offering accurate, comprehensive, and current information about opportunities to study at accredited post-secondary institutions in the U.S. So just before we get started, I want to remind the participants towards the end, we will copy the links to the individual sessions with the different universities that are presenting today. So make sure to copy and paste those links somewhere else so you don't lose those links as we finish, okay? So be looking for those. They will be posted in the chat box. And also, I want to remind the participants that we are in a 10-day event, and this is the fifth, so there are more days ahead. Please make sure that if you miss one of the webinars this week, the same subjects will be presented by other institutions during the following week. So pay attention to those. And finally, I just want to introduce our presenters. We have 6 institutions today. The subject will be tips on how to write a competitive personal statement, writing samples, and letters of recommendation. So take note on those. The institutions presenting today are St. Louis, University of San Francisco, Northwestern, University of San Diego, Indiana University Maurer, and Emory. Welcome, and I will leave the presenters to go ahead with the topic.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. We've prepared a presentation so you can follow along. Please let me know if you can't see it before we get started. Right.
We can see it now.
Perfect. All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Olivera Jovanovic, and I'm representing the University of San Francisco, and I'll dive into the first part of our first topic, which is personal statements. I like to first start with the caveat that what a personal statement is or what it should include depends largely on the school to which you are applying. Law schools will have different prompts, so it's really important that you consult with each school. What we'll talk about today are going to be general tips and tricks to be competitive in your personal statement, but do double check with each institution. So as a general rule, a good personal statement is one that describes your background, your goals, and the reasons for applying to a program. I like to pause and take a minute to differentiate a personal statement, which is going to compose those multitude of factors, with a statement of purpose. A statement of purpose often refers to specifically why you want to apply to a law school. And while that's generally part of a personal statement, and it's something that we welcome that you discuss, it should not be the entirety of your statement. Again, I'll add that caveat back in to check with each school. So why does the personal statement matter? Well, when you're considering your application package, and again, every school is going to have a different application requirements for a complete package, your personal statement is sometimes the only chance that you have to directly address us, the Law School Admissions Committee. Remember, not all programs require interviews, and you will not normally get the chance to have one-on-one interaction with every member of the admissions committee. So while you may meet some of us on the road, the chances are there's a larger committee behind the scenes, and you want them all to have an understanding of who you are. Also, depending on the school, it might be the only writing sample that you're able to present to the admissions committee to see. So it is representative of your writing ability. And as you know, there are schools of varying sizes, and some schools are competitive. So your personal statement is your opportunity to set yourself apart amongst a competitive group of law school applicants. So take the time with your personal statement to show us your character, what's important to you, and why you're a great fit for our school. I also want to give you a few tips on how to approach it. Just like every school is different and every applicant is different, and we try and take a holistic view of our applicants generally, you should plan enough time for preparing your personal statement. And that means researching the school's guidelines on the personal statement prompt. And if you aren't sure, reach out to any of us or any of the schools that you're applying to, because we're more than happy to answer those types of questions. Research the school and the program, and make sure you're not using a one-size-fits-all essay for schools that might have very different prompts. So, the last point I want to note is, what should your personal statement demonstrate? Generally, it should demonstrate who you are and how you write. And for more detail on this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from Indiana University, Maurer School of Law.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Olivera. As my colleague mentioned, I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on some do's and don'ts, talking about being able to demonstrate in your personal statement who you are and how you write. First, so thinking about how you can express yourself and tell the admissions committee who you are. The personal statement is a great opportunity to give some additional information, not just to repeat or summarize the same information that is in your resume, but to give more ideas, something that's relevant, but maybe doesn't fit in your resume, maybe to add something that you're particularly proud of or something that you want to highlight. Don't write an autobiography, however, from birth to today. Although you might have a very interesting life, your personal statement won't necessarily be very long, and my next colleague will talk a little bit more about that. But it really is to highlight your accomplishments, as in the next point. And I'd like to give a little bit of a special tip here. You may or may not be aware that in most of American culture, we're pretty proud of our accomplishments, and we're pretty open and forthright about them. Whereas some of the international students that I've talked to before have been a little bit more shy and reticent to kind of highlight their accomplishments. So you need to strike a bit of a balance in talking about all of the wonderful things that you've done, but don't be generally boastful. Give some specific details and specific highlights that you're particularly proud of, or you think that are specifically relevant to applying to law school. The personal statement is a great place to explain any gaps or any problems with your application. So that might mean that you took some time off of school, so you have a gap in your education, or maybe you have a gap in your employment history. And in your personal statement, you can explain why that is, maybe what happened. Maybe you decided to take a year off and travel around the world, and what a great experience that was. And that led to you wanting to seek social justice around the world and go to law school in the United States. It's a really good place as well to demonstrate why you would be a good fit for a particular program. As my colleague mentioned, every law school is going to have a different kind of application and may have different kind of program. And while an LLM from a US law school, they share a lot in common, there's still some differences, and you might want to highlight those differences to show how you would fit into the program or into this particular law school community. So it, as Olivera mentioned, it can be tailored and should be tailored to the specific program that you're applying to. And then if you're not quite sure what else to talk about in your personal statement, a couple of suggestions that many students will take the chance to explain some kind of special life lesson or illustrate how they've overcome some particular difficult challenge in life. And this, as long as this is done well with detail, and respectful of your privacy, of course, this is a really great way to show the committee who you are and what made you who you are, why you are doing and why you have the hopes and the dreams that you have today. Okay, on to talking about how you write. My colleague mentioned this before, but the personal statement is may the only writing sample that you provide for an application. And how you write is so important also in letting the admissions committee know who you are, but also to show what you could do. So generally speaking, you should write your personal statement to be honest, but positive. We all have some maybe honest, but not so positive things that have happened to us in our lives. But you want to try and give those a positive turn. Be focused and specific about what you're talking about. General personal statements that really don't talk about you specifically don't do much good for the admissions committee to get to know you. Make sure that you're well organized and use a logical writing structure. So that remember that admissions committees are reading hundreds of applications, and to have yours be well written and organized will be very favorably looked at. Be professional, yet use a formal writing style. You are applying to a professional school, and we treat our students as professionals, and we expect them to also comport themselves that way. Really important, be free. Your writing sample, personal statement should be free of grammatical and typographical errors. Remember, this is your chance to shine, and if that means having a friend look over the grammar for you, that may be necessary. Do your best, but this goes to the last point. Make sure that this is also your own work. Don't Google how to write a personal statement and then copy a personal statement off of the internet. You want to make sure that you are writing this, that it is telling people who you are, and that and showing what you can do. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Robin Alveri, who will talk about the length of the personal statement.
Great, thank you so much. Just before we move on, I wanted to bring to your attention, if you didn't see it in the question and answer session, there was a question whether US law schools accept British English spelling in applications or personal statements. And since we're in personal statements right now, I thought Olivera and Gabrielle, if you have anything to add there, I just put an answer in the chat box saying it shouldn't matter, that probably both versions of spelling would be accepted by most law schools.
I agree, and that's a wonderful answer.
Thank you. you. Well, as you heard, my name is Robin Alveri. I'm the Assistant Director for Graduate and International Programs at the University of San Diego School of Law. And I'll be taking us through the last point on personal statements, which is the length of the personal statement. Specifically, how long should your personal statement be? It's a common question. I'm sure everybody on the panel has probably heard this from applicants. And you have to check by school, as with many other things discussed with personal statements, because there may be some variation. Some schools require a certain minimum or maximum number of pages on the personal statement, while others specify no page limit at all. So if the school that you're applying to has no specific limit, no minimum and no maximum, then I would just urge you to use your best judgment. When I'm talking to prospective applicants, and I hear this question, my normal advice to them is to try to keep the personal statement to about 2 pages maximum. It's not that we won't read it if it's more than 2 pages, or we think it's too short if it's only 1 page, but 2 pages should be, I think, enough space for most people to hit the points that have been mentioned by my colleagues that you should be emphasizing in your personal statement. So for me, you know, we go through a lot of files, so just keep that in mind as you're applying to different schools. Admissions officers read lots and lots of documents and applications. In addition to the personal statements, there's resumes to review and transcripts to look at, letters of recommendation to review, and the application itself, possibly a writing sample. So concise writing in all of your documents, and especially in your personal statement, is important. If you can write clearly and concisely, that will also help demonstrate that you have on-point writing, that you're focused, and that carries over well into the legal field, right? So that's kind of general advice. Again, just check with each school that you may be applying to, and definitely stick with their. Okay. So that is all I have to say on the suggested length of personal statements. So now we will be moving into letters of recommendation. So I will turn it over to our colleagues in that section.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Tara Molut. I am the Assistant Director for International Admission at St. Louis University School of Law. So we are talking about letters of recommendation today. Unlike the statement that you have to write it, this letters of recommendations usually comes from people who know you and maybe professors or employers. Almost all law schools and graduate programs in general require applicants to submit a recommendation letter or 2. Some programs require 3. While your transcript and test and personal statement are vital component of your graduate application, an excellent recommendation letter can make up for weaknesses in any of these areas. And I would say a well-written recommendation letter provides admission committees with information that isn't found elsewhere in the application. It's a detailed discussion from a faculty member of the personal qualities, accomplishment, and experiences that make you unique and perfect for the program to which you are applying for. I mean, each school probably have different ways of receiving the recommendation letters. I encourage you to communicate with the school representatives to know how do they want the recommendation letter. Some schools require to be sent by mail, and some others require that by email. For my school, for LLM program, I usually ask the students to share my email address with the person who writes the letter and have them send that to me directly. Recommendation letters should come from people who know you well and can objectively describe activities you have been involved in or comment on your character, talents, or intellect. recommendation letters should be written by people who respect you enough to say glowing things about you as a student or as a lawyer, and who hold positions in school or work that are above your own. At least I would say one letter should be submitted from a past or current professor, mainly for the LLM program. Another could be from someone in a slightly different role, including a research advisor, a senior colleague, or a professor from different department or kind of class. No matter who is this, the recommender should know the applicant and recognize their accomplishment. It also helps if the recommender understands some details about the program to which the candidate is applying for. In our case, it's LLM in American law. So generally the recommendation letters that we are from people who are in the field and they understand the program very well. Please don't assume that nobody reads it, or maybe they read it or they don't read it, because lawyers read everything. So make sure that just the advice that's given for the personal statement, the grammar and everything should be correct, or make sure that it's correct. It doesn't have to be as long as the personal statement, but just give us the information, enough information about you, and just the validation for sometimes it's something that you put on your personal statement when somebody else confirm it or verify it. That's a great way to let the admissions committee know about you and know more about you. And I think Mary Beth, my colleague, has more to add to this subject.
Believe it or not, I do. I'm Mary Beth Busby, and I'm the Director of Graduate and International Program Admissions at Northwestern, and I just want to take a minute to thank you all for spending a little bit of your Friday night with us. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I want to talk a little bit about who should write your letters. And this is a question that I get with a lot of frequency. And as with most questions, the answer is, it depends. As Tara mentioned, it's very, very important that the people who are writing your letters know you well. We'll have the transcript of your grades, we'll have your resume. What we don't have is sort of qualitative or descriptive information about you as a person, about your work ethic, about your writing ability, about your ability to work with others and how you participate in class. So again, it's very important to have somebody that knows you well and can speak to these things. And just another caveat, I wouldn't choose your recommender based solely on status. We'll get letters of recommendation from a named partner in a law firm or the dean of the law school, but when we get to the letter itself, it's pretty evident that that person doesn't know you very well because there's very few specifics. So that's far less helpful than if we had even an assistant professor who was speaking very specifically about you. Now, I guess to get back to the original question, who should actually write the letter? And again, I think it depends. If you're currently finishing up your law studies, absolutely have a professor write the letter of recommendation. You're applying to be a student, and the professor can speak to your abilities as a student. So I think that makes perfect sense. If you've been practicing for a few years, I think this is the sweet spot. You're probably still close enough with your professors that you could have an academic letter of recommendation, but also can provide us with a professional letter. And I think this is great because those two people, the academic and the professional, will speak to different sides of you, to different qualities and different attributes. So that's probably best if you can provide one of each. And sort of the third category is somebody who's been out of school for, 5 to 10 years, and maybe you're, further away from your academic experience and not connected necessarily with professors. In this case, it's perfectly appropriate to just use professional letters. We're not going to judge you based on who is writing the letter, as long as the letters are very specific. And in closing, I guess just a few tips as you're going through the process of asking for letters. The first is start early. You're obviously asking busy people to take time and write a letter about you. So most schools do admit on a rolling basis, meaning we start to review files probably November or December and make decisions on a rolling basis. So the sooner your file is complete, the better off you are. So if you give your recommenders a heads up, they can get that letter in a timely fashion and get your application in front of the admissions committee sooner. Another tip would be to give your recommender a copy of your resume and maybe even your personal statement, or at the very least sort of a summary of why you're seeking the degree and what your academic interests are, what your career interests are after. That will help them write a thoughtful letter that will kind of comport with the other aspects of the application itself. So that's all that I have. I think I'm turning it over to Anthony now to talk about the writing sample.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. I'd like to echo Mary Beth. Thank you for taking the time out of your Friday evening. I know everybody's probably got better things to be doing, but we really appreciate you taking at least an hour out to join us and learn a little bit more. So my name's Anthony. I am from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I will be talking very briefly about writing samples. We'll note before we go into this that you'll notice on a lot of LLM applications, writing samples aren't a requirement, though they may be a supplemental piece that you might be able to provide afterwards. But as with pretty much every answer we'll give, it really depends on the school. So make sure you're checking on their website. So we'll start with just what a writing sample is. As I mentioned, it's required for some programs and not most. If you do go on to complete a JD or an SJD degree, almost all of those applications will require a writing sample. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But the writing sample is really a way for the admissions committee or the reviewer of the application to get a sense of how you'll perform in a classroom setting. And so they're really looking for a piece of writing that they can judge your ability to write and complete a paper or some kind of research, either for a class or a dissertation. So when you're thinking of what a writing sample is, it's usually an academic paper that you've previously used and submitted for another class. Like I mentioned, it's meant to showcase your academic writing ability. So again, as you're thinking of which paper to use, you want to make sure it's in an academic setting and it involves some kind of an academic topic as you use that. So that's the best way for either an admissions officer or a faculty member to gauge. It can also be used to measure your engagement within your desired area of study as well. And so, if you really want to study transactional law or civil rights, whatever it may be, it's usually best to pick something that's at least tangentially related to that topic area so that they can get a sense of your depth of knowledge in the area and how you would be able to perform in terms of research and writing within that topic as well. So we can go to the next slide. So some acceptable forms that you might want to consider. As I mentioned, papers from classes. There's a lot of, I'm sure you've taken a lot of great classes during your LLB, or if you complete the LLM in the States and then decide to go on to a SJD or a JD, keep in mind as you're writing those papers, they can be useful for future purposes such as this as well. But if you're applying for the LLM, any papers that you have from your LLB would be great. Any kind of published research. So again, this doesn't necessarily have to be from the legal field. If you've been published in any way, that's always great. Having a published piece on your resume is always a plus. Do be aware that if you do claim that you're published, most admissions committees will try and verify that. So I know there's a lot of sort of pay to publish places as well. We do generally look for it to be through a peer-reviewed academic source. So keep that in mind as well. And again, if you don't have or don't feel comfortable with any of those others, blog posts and articles are always great. Again, you want to make sure they're professional. You want to make sure that they're somewhat academic in nature as well. And for those of you that might not have any papers from class, or you've been out of work or out of school for a little while, you've been working some projects from work, whether you're practicing and you're working on cases, if you're able to share briefs or anything like that, that could also go a long way in helping select your writing samples as well. And so I'll wrap up just talking a little bit about the do's and don'ts of the writing sample, just some suggestions as you're looking. So you want to make sure you follow the instructions. Again, with everything when you're applying, not just in the States, but to universities across the world, you want to make sure you're following the instructions for the specific school. I think that's an easy trap to fall in with LSAC, since you're submitting to multiple schools within the same system. You want to make sure you're following the instructions for each specific school. Make sure you're submitting it in the correct format. If they say it shouldn't be longer than 20 pages, make sure it's not longer than 20 pages. If it needs to be double spaced, whatever the rules are, make sure you're following those. Again, make the sample relevant. I think a lot of people also just tend to submit the paper and leave it as part of their application and move on without really mentioning it anywhere else. But this could also be a good way to mention it in your statement of purpose or your personal statement, or somewhere else on the application, or even in your resume. Make sure you're highlighting it, especially if it's published. Make sure you're editing it again. I think it's a very easy trap as well. If you got an A in the paper in the class, you just click the file, drag and drop, and submit it. Go back, edit it, especially if it was from a little while ago. It's good to go back and maybe edit it for relevancy for anything that might have happened since you wrote the paper. And like I mentioned, provide some context as well. Some of the things you want to avoid, you don't want to write a brand new paper. That's obviously a lot more work than you need to do. So try and find something that you've already done. Make sure you're not plagiarizing anywhere as well. I know some schools do run through plagiarism software. And so make sure you're avoiding using anybody else's work and claiming it as your own. Again, topics should be relevant. So if you wrote a paper on environmental laws in the 1990s, might not be as relevant today if you're applying in 2020. So try and update that as well. And co-authored papers, you can certainly use them, but generally you want to have something that you can claim as your own work as well. So just keep that in mind. So that's about all that I had. The final thing that I'll note, and you can probably take a screenshot of it, I did find some handy resources for writing samples from some of our colleagues in the Ivy League. So these are great resources that have a very detailed and much more instruction on some samples of what a writing sample should be, and some general tips and tricks for the statement there as well. So feel free to take a look at those. But I believe that's all that we have. I'm not sure if we have time for any questions or not, but I'll hand it back over. I know there's been some questions there as well. And we have all of our contact information listed here as well. So we would love to hear from you all after the session. I know we each have some individual Zoom meetings that you can all jump in as well to speak with each of us. But I will hand it over for the closing.
For the people that might not be checking the chat box, maybe if you guys think one of or some of the questions, even though they've been answered, are relevant, you can go ahead and answer some of those. And as I post in the chat the links for the individual meetings, just reminding the viewers to copy and paste those links somewhere else, so that you don't lose them and you can join after this webinar with each of the institutions that you decide to join with, okay?
I noticed that we got a lot of questions about letters of recommendation and the ranking title or the person that they should choose. And so I thought it was pretty well answered, but I thought it would be worth reiterating that for most of us, and I invite any of my colleagues to chime in on this, It's about who can write the better personal statement for you and objectively answer and speak to some of the criteria that our colleagues laid out. So that's a common question I get from students, so I thought it was just worth reiterating. I think Mary Beth said it well. She would rather see an assistant professor who knows you very well rather than the dean of the law school that can't speak to your ability to handle challenges in the classroom like the professor probably would. But I invite any of my colleagues to kind of chime in on that issue because that came up in I feel like a number of different questions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also there were a lot of questions about whether alumni should write letters. And actually that's a good point that I didn't bring up. And I welcome letters from our alumni, especially, and this is the caveat, if they know you really well. Again, you know, that's sort of the overarching consideration here, that they know you well. But I really do value input from our alumni because they have a vested interest, I think, in having us enroll people who will do well here and represent the school well after graduation. So absolutely, if you know an alum, I think that would be a really good person to ask.
And somebody asked if about sending letters through LSAC. They by necessity have to be a generic letter and not tailored necessarily to the school. So, which is fine. We all know that. We all get that and expect it. But definitely, if you have an alum that, if you're applying to a particular school and you are well known by an alum of that school, if they can write and send it directly to admissions, that's probably helpful as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point too, is it's really easy to stay within the LSAC system as well, but I know a lot of students are afraid to reach out to admissions offices as well. It can be intimidating sometimes, but we're here to help you as you go through that. So whether it's emailing a letter directly to us or getting some advice on your statement, I know sometimes I'll even help some students if they ask me to give them some pointers and tips and maybe read over their statement and give them some generic help on, you know, maybe some formatting or things. You know, reach out to us. We're here to help you. Don't be afraid. I think that's always a point that students overlook.
Here is an interesting question that just came in, if anyone wants to answer it. This person has a letter of recommendation for their place of employment, but they have a relative they work with. It's their firm. So will that affect how we review the acceptance letter? Anybody want to jump in?
Is the uncle writing the letter? Or just the uncle works at the firm?
Right. It says
that's a distinction.
Yeah. I would recommend to this person to find someone else at the firm who supervised some of their work that could speak to their ability, even if they're not as highly ranked as the uncle at the law firm. I always think that that's always my advice to applicants.
Right.
I would just add to that if you can get a second letter of recommendation from a non-affiliated firm or a professor, that would be great too, just to kind of show a little bit broader perspective of you than just the family's firm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There was one question that came in that I thought was pretty interesting about using work product for writing samples. And I know that one of our colleagues already addressed it, but absolutely redact personal client information. It's a good step in preparing to be an attorney in multiple jurisdictions, is to protect client confidentiality. Okay. More on letters of recommendation. Is it useful to submit more than the allowed or minimum, or is it just okay?
I would say 3 to 4 is probably the threshold that you shouldn't cross. At Northwestern, we only require 1. I don't know about the other schools, but oftentimes people will submit 2 or 3, and I think that's great. As we talked about earlier, you know, especially if they're different perspectives, an academic perspective and a professional perspective, then that's really adding value to your application. So, but once you get more than 3 or 4 in your file, then you run the risk that we're not going to read them all and we might miss the one that's, you know, really strong. So, and typically they'd just be saying the same things, right?
We have a cap of 3. So I think it's important to look at what the university requires. Absolutely. Let's see.
That new question is good about does the recommender have to send the letter themselves or does the applicant? So unlike in some places, usually at a U.S. Higher education institution, we would not accept a letter coming directly from the applicant. It needs to be submitted and sent direct from the recommender or through the LSEC system. But the letters, and I write a lot of letters of recommendation myself, and they go, they never go to the student.
And there's another question related to language and letters of recommendation. So assuming that the person that writes your letter doesn't speak English, how should that be handled? They said it was answered privately in the chat, so they couldn't quite see the answer. We require that it be in English, and so we often encourage students to translate it before they send it, either through a professional service. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I replied to this student for his question. I recommend that he finds somebody else who can write the letter in English. And if he couldn't for any reason, then he can explain that he couldn't find anybody who can write the letter in English. Therefore, he's attaching the English the letter translated into English with the original letter in that case. But we have not gotten anything like this in years, so it's very occasionally maybe.
Well, I think we're done with questions. So please copy the links for the follow-ups. You can take the chance to talk to the institutions and ask them about their programs specifically. And thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to the presenters and the participants. We are very happy to have this amount of students interested in LLM programs in the US. All right, I guess we'll see each other later, right?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Mariana. Thank you.